This is the Zhengdong New District, one of the most famously known ghost towns of China. It has 10 plus years of unsold apartments with a number of abandoned projects. It feels empty, and that's because it basically is. This town wasn't abandoned or anything, but rather never fully populated. Now, believe it or not, this isn't the only town like this in China. In fact, there's close to 50 of them, and they can collectively house up to 65 million people. Yet vacancies are a major problem, despite the country having over 1.4 billion people. It wasn't supposed to be like this though. Take for example the Kangbashi District, located in Ordos. It was conceived as a futuristic, grandiose town that was designed to house workers who would work in the rich coal mines that lie nearby. The idea was simple, yet extremely ambitious. The exploitation of coal would demand a large workforce to keep the industry going, and there would be a great need for housing and office space. At the same time, this otherwise remote and unattractive location would generate a lot of money that could then be used to open new businesses, and so the need for constructing a completely new town seemed like a perfect solution. Construction began in 2004 and finished 11 years later in 2015, with over $161 billion being spent. But people weren't very happy with how things ended up. High property taxes, as well as the high cost of purchasing a new apartment in the town, discouraged people from moving. So in the end, it was only government officials that moved into the town, while most of the buildings still remain unoccupied today. There's now only a population of 153,000 people living there, while it was originally supposed to be home to 1 million people. The government now hopes that the population of Kangbashi will rise to 200,000 by the end of 2025. But even these humble numbers may prove difficult to achieve, as Inner Mongolia's population has been shrinking at an alarming pace, and the province now has 3% less population than a decade earlier. Regardless, according to some estimates, real estate activity now accounts for close to 30% of China's economy. Every year, China builds 15 million new homes. That's 5 times as many as the US and Europe combined. In fact, the country has used more cement for construction of new towns between 2011 and 2013 than the United States used in the entire 20th century, and China just keeps building. The thing is though, these ghost towns aren't complete failures by the Chinese government. They were actually built with a very long-term plan. You see, these mysterious and almost completely empty towns are a part of China's larger plan to move up to 300 million citizens currently living in rural areas into urban locations. According to the World Bank, just 18% of the Chinese population had been living in urban areas in 1978, and since then, China's urban population has only skyrocketed, with about 65% of the Chinese population living in urban areas today. This is a trend that the Chinese government has a vested interest in, and for good reason. With urban migration comes higher income earning citizens, which lifts domestic consumption, therefore reducing the economy's reliance on external trade. And since Beijing and Shanghai strictly limit the number of people they'll accept under China's residency system due to becoming overpopulated, new towns have become increasingly important. And this is exactly what these ghost towns will serve as a purpose for, all prepped and ready to be moved into in the future. Keep in mind though, many of these projects started in the early 2000s, and China's population is still slowly continuing to grow. So why are these towns still not bursting with life? Well, first of all, the rate of the real estate expansion doesn't match the rise of the purchasing power of China's population. People simply can't afford to buy the millions of dollars worth of apartments that have been built in these Chinese towns. So it looks like the Chinese government overestimated the number of people who can afford to and want to move from rural areas to urban areas. Another sometimes overlooked reason for the lack of inhabitants in these towns is the fact that people who do earn more money often have 2 or 3 apartments that they don't live in. They simply buy them and leave them empty. And there's a reason for this. There's a strong belief among the population that real estate is the safest investment in China. Plus, keep in mind that the Chinese middle class doesn't have many options when it comes to investment opportunities. Investing abroad is mostly not allowed, and their stock market is not really stable. This has resulted in China's people storing 70% of their wealth in real estate. But if you've been following the news in the last couple of months, you've probably heard about Evergrande, China's biggest real estate company, which also happens to be the most in-debt company in the world, with over $300 billion in debt and 1.6 million undelivered apartments. Now, many critics say that this was the beginning of the burst of China's real estate bubble, but let's not jump to conclusions. Evergrande is as much of a consequence of China's overblown real estate market as it is its main cause. The company launched hundreds of projects in 200 Chinese cities, but their projected clients, private business employees and farmers, simply couldn't afford to buy a home in their properties. Take a look at the city of Luan, located about 350 miles west of Shanghai. with its half-finished, high-rise buildings still covered with plastic tarps, an uncompleted $9 billion theme park, and an overgrown electric vehicle plant. The city is a mirror of Evergrande's current state of affairs, a post-apocalyptic scene of lost hope. The site remains unfinished, as the company has no money to finish the half-built structures, much to the dismay of the few hopeful homeowners who are still paying their mortgage, but can't move into their new apartments. Investors, some desperate as the homeowners themselves, have resorted to some creative thinking in order to attract new inhabitants to their empty neighborhoods. Do you see these KFC and Starbucks signs in the eastern district of Zhengzhou? It gives you a sense of security. If such huge corporations have already opened businesses in that city, then it's bound to come to life soon, right? Wrong. These are fake signs. None of these companies have come or plan to open business here in the near future. So what are they doing there? Well, they're a part of make-believe that investors have created in order to lure people to move in. It's all essentially a set design. But in the end, these plans mostly don't work, and some apartment buildings in these ghost towns suffer the fate of being demolished. This happened to 15 unfinished apartment buildings in the city of Kunming. After several years of abandonment, it was deemed that the structures posed a safety threat and were demolished in a matter of minutes. Many such buildings still loom about China, awaiting a resolution of their uncertain fate. Regardless, the Chinese government, as well as some real estate experts, call for patience, claiming China's real estate strategy will yield results in the long term, and that the ghost town scenario is just temporary. In all honesty, some former ghost towns have indeed come to life after decades of struggling to attract inhabitants. Perhaps the most famous one is the city of Shenzhen, that made the incredible transformation from a small fishing town to the third largest city in China. In 1980, this rural town located at the borders between China and Hong Kong housed 30,000 people. Today, Shenzhen has 17 million inhabitants and is one of the wealthiest cities in China. You'd hardly believe the city was once a fishing town if you looked at how it looks now. Another example of a ghost town turned metropolis is the Zhengdong New Area. It was constructed at a record speed. A third of the planned 150 square kilometers was built in only 5 years. Its growth was slow until a phone manufacturing factory opened up, and suddenly there was demand for 200,000 people who would work at the factory, causing the city to be populated at a record speed. This successful business attracted more international and local investments, raising the economy of Zhengdong's new district by 25% in 5 years, and increasing both its population and its property prices. Even the Kangbashi District is starting to make a slight resurgence, with the secret to its success being education. Let me explain. There is an intense competition among high school students and their parents to be accepted into China's top universities, just like anywhere else in the world. So what happened was, government officials moved some of Ordos's top schools into Kangbashi, such as the Ordos No. 1 High School, which has sent students to leading universities in Beijing. If you wanted to send your child to school there, you had to move to the district, due to tight regulations requiring parents who want their children to go to a top school to own a home within the district. So many families moved, causing property prices and investments to soar. Great teachers were also enticed into moving by offering them housing at half the price. Shenzhen, known as the Chinese version of Manhattan, is a successfully converted ghost city with a population of 1 million inhabitants, having grown from building new schools in the area. It seems like this very well could be a blueprint for the rest of these vacant towns, but only time will tell if these ghost towns get repopulated. And taking into account China's incredible economic growth, I personally think this very long-term vision may end up paying off.